Focus departments. Thank you for joining for the presentation today. And as you join the meeting, if you would please just mute your audio and remain muted during the presentation. We will have a Q&A session following the presentation. You'll be able to unmute and ask questions at that time, and feel free to use the chat feature, pose any questions that you want during the presentation. And in the chat, you will see a link to sign in for the session. Please take a moment to complete the sign in. This is helpful for us to measure attendance at our virtual sessions. So a few more minutes here and we will start.
That the clinic runs on time or doesn't run on time. So let me, if I'll share my screen.
You bet. And I will just do a quick introduction for you and then we will get going. So thank you for being here. And I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Anthony D. Elias. Dr. Elias is a professor.
Can you see?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
I can't hear you, Katie, but you're probably muted.
Can everyone hear me on here? Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So let me begin.
Okay. We'll just go.
So the National Cancer Trials Network program was designed basically in 2012-13. And the first grants came out in 2014, and we were lucky enough to be one of the 30 institutions that got such a grant. And it basically provides funding for adult cooperative group trials. But basically, these are infrastructure grants to larger institutions so that we can accrue and provide mentorship, provide leadership amongst the cooperative group trials. So it involves 4 cooperative groups, SWOG, Alliance, ECOG-ACRIN, and NRG, which was a composite of NSABP and GOG when they merged. So roughly 20 to 25,000 patients in the last decade are on these trials. A lot of these studies do sometimes change clinical practice. So about 30% or 35% of clinical trials change practice in favor of the new treatment, and another group confirmed that the standard of care is actually the way to treat patients. They're different from pharma trials in the sense that there's no specific allegiance to a particular drug. We don't typically, these are not trials that run a trial that a pharma would run. Now, there are some exceptions with some of the NCTN Foundation trials. The foundation trials are generally a cooperative group that is funding this trial through the auspices of their foundation and not through the National Cancer Institute. However, NCTN trials that are without that exception are sponsored by National Cancer Institute. And the mission, of course, is to serve the community of cancer patients with trials that might not be done by the pharma companies who have different ideas. So this is the NCTN SWOG Alliance. Canadian Network Group really is not part of that. It's sort of a little bit outside of that. NRG, ECOG Akron. COG is also separate from NCTN in the sense that that's for the children. And there are 30 lead academic participating sites or LAPs. And these are institutions that are large enough that can be members of any or all of these cooperative groups, and they get specialized support. I'll move on. So this is the current structure. I'm the overall PI of this, and this was approved back in 2014 as incorporating basically all of UC Health. So that was novel at the time because the two requirements was that it required the same regulatory bodies and also the unified financial structure. And UC Health was incorporated in 2013 under a unified budget. Although, as you know, each of the institutions still maintain certain independence from this, but nonetheless, for the purposes of the NCTN and the LAPS grant, they've agreed to have a single budget. Now, there are integrated parts of this site, and that includes North, South, Central, including Highlands Ranch, Cherry Creek, and so forth. The VA and Denver Health are affiliates. Shaw Cancer Center up in Vail is an affiliate. They do have to do these trials with their own regulatory body. They do have to, but we are responsible for their data. And when they get audited, we have to actually make sure they respond properly. So it's essentially, it's a, I suppose, an honor to have affiliates, but there are also some responsibilities in terms of education, teaching, quality, auditing, and so forth, that we as a LAPS institution need to take on. Now, we had the same relationship when we were just SWOG members and had a grant through SWOG. So that's how this is structured. And so the integrated component, all accruals count towards the LAPS grant. The regulatory aspects are centralized within this main member, and payments for accruals are handled by the main member, and we're responsible. With the aligned affiliates, the accruals do not count for the LAPS grant. They do count as cancer center activity potentially, and the site is responsible for their own regulatory. The site bills the cooperative group directly for payment. So if it's a SWOG trial, they bill SWOG. If it's a ECOG trial, they bill ECOG, and so forth. And but we're still responsible for audit results. Having this grant was helpful in that it also allowed us to compete successfully for the UM1 early Clinical Trials Network, which supports phase 1-2 trials. So NCTN supports randomized phase 2 and large phase 3 trials. It typically has a very, very small portfolio of phase 1 trials. And specifically, the things that we're responsible for is leadership within the cooperative groups, participation, namely accrual, as well as chairing various committees and running trials and so forth, the quality of data, training and mentorship. So this is an example of our accrual of this year. This is just 6 months from March to end of September. And these are the sort of numbers about biospecimens, 120, interventional therapeutic accruals, about 60, and quality of life, screening. TMIST is MRI of the breast trial, and so forth. And this is the accrual for this grant year currently. So, and I think this is doubled basically. So all told, we have about 60 accruals between North, South, Central. And so we're hoping to get about 120 therapeutic accruals for the calendar, for the year. We average somewhere around 100 accruals per year, so this would be really good. And we are always hoping to have extra. Obviously, with COVID, we had a dip, but I think we are, in fact, recovering. So we developed an executive committee to prioritize and monitor the trial accrual. We participate in the usual cancer center operations, such as the PRMS, as well as monitoring accrual and justifying keeping trials open or shutting them. We were the impetus to develop the joint operating committees across the system. So, for example, we have a breast committee that meets across North, South, Central to discuss various quality improvement issues. And so this sort of generated this type of integration. We have audits and the data monitoring safety across the entire system. We have a unified budget for these particular trials. And, you know, it opens up a dialogue for a common research pharmacy. So there's certainly, and felt to be potentially a model to open IITs and pharma across the system and credentialing across the system. And certainly we use Encore. So the basic issues, one had to have a single financial system. It's not seamless. The federal dollars have to flow to UCD, UCH, and then we distribute, so we can only support with this grant things that are common to everybody. So things that cross the entire system. We do have unified grants and contracts for this, unified budget. But as you may know, for pharma trials, we haven't really successfully done that quite yet. A unified pharmacy would be a goal. We can manage with 3 pharmacies, but that is a little more cumbersome. We do have a unified audit and a data monitoring safety. And then in terms of membership in the cancer center, the NCI is looking at the ratio of therapeutic accruals to the patients on an analytic tumor registry. So newly diagnosed patients, basically, and they want a ratio of about 10% for cancer centers to be successful in terms of being a comprehensive cancer center. So the cancer center, which includes central, is currently at about 20% for this ratio. Community centers typically are 2%, and I'm glad to say that North and South have both increased this to about 6%. But that basically is sort of one of the structural issues that is trying to get this closer so they can become full members of the cancer center. We do have new sites of care, Cherry Creek, Denver Health, and there are others in the queue, for example, Yampa Valley, possibly even North Platte, but these are not yet there. We've joined Elias as a main member recently, and Marie has successfully completed getting the APP's rostering for chemotherapy. This was not necessarily just an NCTN project, but was actually for the institution. We have electronic methods to do audits now. This was a huge problem because we had to convert from paper charts to electronic, and this is a major upgrade. Remote consents is really actually one of the highlights of COVID, one of the positive features, because this now opens up possibilities to help us increase accrual in underserved populations, both rural and central city, which really we could not effectively do. In other words, currently we accrue patients who are in front of us. It is our hope that we can expand this, particularly in prevention and survivorship trials, to include rural populations, people who can't really transport themselves to the UCH facilities. Certainly we have challenges. For example, one problem is that smaller sites such as Highlands Ranch, Lone Tree, Cherry Creek cannot handle a full portfolio of trials because they don't have that many CRAs. So how do you do that? Well, one might develop the CCTO to have central to provide onboarding and coordination guidance with these sites for trials they don't usually accrue to. It's hard to get the patient to actually just come to this to Mecca, partly because of parking and so forth, and they would have to switch doctors, and that's not comforting for patients, and they have a hard enough time with insecurities surrounding clinical trials. So there are definitely some challenges that we hope to address. Another one is accrual in underserved populations. This is now a major thrust of NCI. The one thing that, the one thing that our cancer center was criticized for is a relative lack of underserved populations. This is not unique to us. This was actually across the entire cancer center membership. So remote consenting, the Spanish clinic, enhanced translation abilities, are some of the things that we can currently do. But we do have difficulties with many of the therapeutic trials. As you know, we have major challenges in even scheduling, clinic infusion, echocardiograms, MRIs, all the travel. These are challenges in terms of coordination. In prevention and survivorship trials, the major issue there is they are multi-oncologic potentially, and they can involve non-cancer patients who wouldn't ordinarily not be seen by us at all. Nonetheless, a number of years ago, we had a trial called Select, which had its own grant funding and successfully accrued 3,000 patients for prostate cancer risk reduction. So I will stop there and be happy to entertain questions. You can put questions in the chat, or you can put questions just verbally. Sarah, are you saying anything? I can't hear anything. No questions?
Okay, Sarah said she's not saying anything.
I can't hear you, Katie.
You can't hear me?
Sarah says she's not saying anything.
I can't hear Marie either. Is everybody muted? My sound is on. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Are there any questions?
I don't see any questions.
All right. Very good. Well, you know, in sum total, we are actually doing very well. We are coming up for another renewal in 2025. So the renewal of the grant will need to go in 2024. I am actually recruiting Dr. Kaur, Brad Kaur, to be a deputy and ultimately take over from me at some point in the next grant cycle.
Great. Thank you for being here today.
Sure. Sorry about clinic.
All right. We appreciate your time.
I had a Cambodian patient who had a Khmer